Davis. So today we're going to be talking about solving rational equations by cross multiplying. So what is an irrational equation? And it's an equation that contains a rational expression, so like 2x plus 1, x minus 1, something like that. Very, very basic. It's an equation that has a variable in the denominator. Okay, so whenever we have 1 over x is our example. Okay, so there are two types of rational equations. So a single fraction equal to a single fraction or expression. And when we have that, we are going to cross multiply. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And the other type is more than one fraction and no common denominator. So we'll have to find a common denominator. And we'll be talking about that tomorrow. Alright, so a rational expression is not defined when its denominator is 0. So, meaning if I have 1 over x, if x at any point equals 0, that means my new fraction would be 1 over 0, and that does not exist. It just does not work. We can't take 1 out of nothing. Okay? So, when this happens, these values are called excluded values. It's kind of similar to extraneous solutions when we have a solution that just doesn't work. So this is kind of the same way, but it's an excluded value. Doesn't mean it's going to be a solution, but it's just a value that we cannot put into our equation. So we have some steps when it comes to solving rational equations. We're going to cross multiply, distribute, move a, b, c to one side if it's quadratic. Because sometimes it might not always be a quadratic. Factor and solve, or other method, if it's not a quadratic, and then check for our excluded values. So let's get into the first example. So let's get into this first example. So first things first, I need to double check for my excluded values. So to find my excluded values, I need to find when my denominator would equal 0. So we have two denominators to worry about. We have x plus 1. So let's see what we have to have in order to make this 0, and that would be when x equals negative 1. So now let's find the other guy. So we have 4x plus 5. So that means we need to find the value that would equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I get 4x equals negative 5, divide by 4 to both sides, and I get negative 5 divided by 4. So these are my two excluded values that I need to be aware of. Okay, so now let's go ahead and solve for x. So first things first, I'm going to cross multiply, and I'm doing red. So we have 3 times 4x plus 5 equals 9 times x plus 1. My second step is to distribute. So I'm going to distribute the 3, distribute the 9. So I have 12x plus 15 equals 9x plus 9. Now we go ahead and solve. We don't have to do the a, b, and c because we don't have a quadratic. So we just solve how we would solve any normal algebraic problem. So I'm going to subtract 9x from both sides. I get 3x plus 15 equals 9. Subtract 15 from both sides, I get 3x equals negative 6. Divide by 3 to both sides, and I get x equals negative 2. My solution is x equals negative 2. So, is that either of my excluded values? No. So this is a good solution, so we're good to go. So let's move on to our second example. So, we have this guy, negative 1 over x equals x plus 3 over 2. Alright, so let's find those excluded values first. So, that means we only have this denominator with a variable. So, I set it equal to 0. X equals 0, so whenever x equals 0, that is an excluded value, so we cannot get x equal to 0 in the end. Now let's go ahead and cross multiply. So I have negative 1 times 2 equals x times x plus 3. Now I can distribute. So I'm going to distribute the negative 1 to the 2 and the x to the x plus 3. So now I have negative 2 equals x squared plus 3x. Well, look at that. We have a quadratic. Now we have to do that third step where we have to set up a, b, and c, meaning I had to set this equation equal to 0. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and so I get 0 equals x squared plus 3x plus 2. We can now factor this nice little quadratic. So I have an x here and an x here because we don't have any coefficient on x squared. I look at my c value and my b value, and that tells me that we are going to have 2 plus signs. And then a factor of 2 is 1 and 2, so that means that. And 1 plus 2 does equal 3. So now we solve it like any other quadratic equation that we've had. So we're going to set x plus 1 equals 0, so we have x equals negative 1. And then we have x plus 2 equal to 0, and x equals negative 2. Now, we have to check both of these answers to see if they're equal to my excluded value. My excluded value is x equals 0. Negative 2 and negative 1 are not 0, so both of these answers work. So we can say, yep, I'm going to have 2 solutions. All right. Let's move on to our third example. So this one's a little bit different. The reason this one is different is because my equation on the right, it doesn't have a denominator, but it does. Remember, all numbers have an implied over 1. So I'm going to rewrite this. 60 over x equals 2x minus 14 over 1. So now I have my 2 denominators that I can easily work with. So I want you to pause the video here and find your excluded videos. So pause the video, find your excluded values. So if you did this correctly, you would have found that you have one excluded value of x equals 0. Okay, so we just can't get 0 as a solution. So let's go ahead and cross multiply. Now I want you to try this one to cross multiply it. So pause the video here and try and cross multiply. So if you cross multiplied this correctly, you should have found that it is 60 times 1 equals x times 2x minus 14. Awesome job if you got it. So now let's go ahead and distribute. So we have 60 times 1 over here, and then now we have to distribute this x to both sides. So now we have 2x squared minus 14x. Alright, so now I notice that we have an x squared. That means we have a quadratic. We need to set a, b, and c next to each other because we need to set it equal to 0. So let's go ahead and set up that quadratic by subtracting 60 from both sides. Alright, so now we can factor this like normally. I want you to pause the video here and factor this quadratic. It should be a review for you, so go ahead and do it. Pause the video and do it. Alright, so if you factored this correctly, this is what you should have gotten. You should have seen that GCF of 2 factored it out. So now you have x squared minus 7x minus 30, and 2 factors of 30 that add to 7, negative 7 I may add. It is going to be a positive 3 and a negative 10. Now that we've factored this, we can go ahead and find those 2 solutions by setting both of our parentheses equal to 0. So we have x plus 3 equals 0. So that means x equals negative 3. And then we have x minus 10 equals 0. So that's x equals positive 10. Alright, so now we need to double check that this is not an excluded value. Is 10 or negative 3 equal to 0? No, it is not. So that means both of these guys work. And so we have 2 solutions to my expression. Alright, let's move on to example 4. Alright, so example 4 is going to be a little bit different, but still the same idea. I'll draw a line to separate. So, first things first, check for those excluded values. Again, I want you to pause the video here and try finding those excluded values for yourself. So pause the video and find those excluded values. So if you did this correctly, you would have found that our only denominator with a variable is 2x. So we got to do 2x equals 0, and then we find that, again, if we have x equals 0, that is an excluded value. So now we can go ahead and cross multiply. So this one's a little different, so I'm going to work with you. So I'm going to do 6 times x squared minus 4. And then I'm going to do negative 5 times 2x. If you notice, this is going to be a big common mistake, is that we have that negative there. If we have negative 5, 6, that means we have to apply either the negative to the 5 or the 6. Not both, just one. So I applied it to my 5 because it's just how it do, you know. So now that we've successfully cross multiplied, let's distribute. So distribute the 6, and then we have 6x squared minus 24 equals negative 10x. Moving on from there, I see that we have a quadratic, so we need to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to add 10x to both sides. So we get it set equal to 0. So now I want you to factor this quadratic. See if you can do it. Don't forget about GCFs. Pause the video. Alright, if you factored this correctly, you should have gotten 2 times the quantity of 3x minus 4 times the quantity of x plus 3. Okay, and don't forget to set it equal to 0 because that's what I did. Alright, so now that we've correctly factored this, we can now find the two solutions to my problem. So I'm going to set equal 3x minus 4 equals 0. Add 4 to both sides and I get 3x equals 4. Divide by 3 and I get x equals 4/3. Alright, so now I'm going to do the other one. I have x plus 3 equals 0. Subtract 3 from both sides and I get x equals negative 3. I'm going to double check that both of my solutions are not 0. They're not. So that means x minus 3 and x equals 4/3 are my two solutions and they both work. They are not excluded. So that is it for today's video. I hope you have an awesome day and stay safe. And let your teacher know if you have any questions.